Hey guys, this is Chad Judice, and you're listening to The Art of Suffering. Our mess becomes God's message. St. Paul, the apostle to the Gentiles, suffered greatly in his apostolic ministry and wrote extensively about its spiritual effects on him in his second letter to the Corinthians. Therefore, that I may not become too elated, a thorn of the flesh was given to me, to beat me, to keep me from being too elated. 3 times I begged the Lord about this, that it might leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for power is made perfect in weakness. As a parent, there are many moments when one can relate to these words of St. Paul. I know that my own child and my own children have certainly made me aware of my own limitations and my inadequacies. In those moments, the best I can do is echo the words of St. Paul and surrender knowing his grace is sufficient for me, and that God's power is made perfect in my weakness. I've watched my child, Eli, suffer helplessly, knowing there was nothing I could do to stop it, which is one of the most difficult things to do as a parent. But I have not been asked to trust in God's plan so much in those moments that I could willingly surrender my child to him for all eternity. That's a whole nother level of pain that's shared by some pretty extraordinary company, like the Blessed Mother. Jesus, her son, did not suffer, however, to save us from suffering. He did so to redeem suffering, and he reveals that his will in our life is not always our will for our life. Today, I have a married couple here who's been asked to do that twice, and through trial, adversity, anger, forgiveness, and eventually healing, found consolation in the last place that they would have expected. Kelly and Ryan Bro are the founders of Redbird Ministries in the Diocese of Lafayette, an organization developed to minister to other parents who have lost a child and are struggling in that grief to find that consolation. Kelly has recently published her book, chronicling her and Ryan's journey, entitled Hiding in the Upper Room, How the Catholic Sacraments Heal Me from the Grief of Child Loss, which I just finished reading. I want to share one of the most profound quotes in the book before allowing Kelly and Ryan to share something about their journey. I quote, St. John of the Cross would describe these days as my dark night of the soul. And I can attest to feeling like my soul had gone completely dark the night Emma left Earth. I believe God allows us to endure this dark night without emotional and spiritual comfort so that we expand our hearts and cling to our cross. Clinging to the cross expands your heart. And suffering opens the heart to a self-giving love that isn't possible without it. Kelly and Ryan, welcome. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your ministry and your willingness to share this with so many people. How you guys doing today?
Good, Chad. How you doing?
Great.
I'm making it. I'm having a little bit of a rough week, like we kind of talked about before we started recording with some technology, but I'm going to trust in God that everything's going to go great through this interview and it's going to be okay.
And we prayed for that before too, specifically because, technology is always an issue when you're doing God's work.
Oh, absolutely. I don't doubt that at all. And I want to commend you for having the courage to write the book and to share your story. I know as somebody who shared a personal journey and you're talking about very intimate details about your life with other people in a public way, sometimes that can be very difficult. But I think the thing that drives me is probably, I would assume, based on what I read and what I interpreted from what I read, that drives you. That it not only is a help to you, it kind of helps you heal, but it also helps other people heal. When I was reading the book, the first part of it is it's your journey, and it's like, to me, what I took away from it was that death, unfortunately, was like a waterfall in your life. It kept coming and coming and coming. Until you realize what God's trying to do and communicate to you through that event. Ryan got hurt. You had some trouble getting pregnant. Then you guys got pregnant. And then you had the twins. And then when the twins were born, it was just a streamline of tragedy. And eventually, after you lost 2 of your children, suffered a miscarriage and was pregnant for another child, you had this moment where you have a friend of yours from the school where your daughter goes to school now, and I think she lost a child, and it was kind of like a clarifying moment for you in the book. And maybe you two guys could maybe walk us through some of that journey leading to the point where you had that clarity in the midst of that suffering that you were enduring. Maybe Ryan can give his perspective as a man and as a husband, and then maybe Kelly, you could give yours as a wife and as a female.
Okay.
Yeah, sure. So when we suffered our first loss, it was also it was quick. It was 15 days when we lost Talon. So Kelly had delivered the baby through a C-section, so she was hurting. So she really couldn't do anything for the first couple of days.
Mm-hmm. It was an emergency. My placenta abrupted, so there was a lot of, like, my health was at stake, the baby's health. It was just a lot of uncertainty at the time, I think. So there was some things that we didn't even realize that was really happening.
Yeah. And then we lost Talon at 15 days old, which, we never really got a chance to grieve Talon. Because as soon as we buried Talon, that's when we found out Emma had MRSA. And we had some issues with the doctors. Not issues, I'm sorry. We had doctors are having a hard time finding
they couldn't find a doctor that would perform the surgery on Emma. So what happened was she contracted this infection called MRSA, and it caused her to have 3 vascular aneurysms. So it was just a whole lot of it. Just things just kept happening, and it was like really no time to begin the grief.
No, I remember reading that part of the book about you guys having the Talon had just passed away, and you had to leave the hospital where she was born, right, to do the surgery somewhere else, if I remember correctly. Is that right?
Yeah.
Yes.
They flew us to Fort Worth, Texas, to have the surgery. Yeah. So we got uprooted from our support system as well to have the surgery, and we were there for a couple weeks before we came home. I think for me, whenever we got home from the hospital, it probably started, I think, whenever we were first, and I don't even know if I shared this in my book, but whenever we were told that Emma was coming home, I had a panic attack, because the idea of her coming home meant that I was now responsible for her health care. And, my truth was that, she was going to die on my watch, and it was such a scary situation. So I think I had a combination of postpartum depression and grief that kind of just, they tag teamed each other and really went after my heart. I was very, very angry at God during this time, but I think more so when Emma passed away. That was kind of whenever I lost my faith. And it wasn't really a question like, when people think of losing your faith, and you assume like you don't believe that God exists, and that's not how it was. My questions, I'm sorry, was, is God good, and does he love me? Because it didn't feel like love. The suffering, the cross that came, it felt exactly like that. It felt like death. It felt like a cross. And it really, it consumed me. Like I couldn't think past the fog that I was in. I was stuck in this tornado. And Ryan and I talk about that a lot. Like we felt trapped. Everyone's life goes back to normal, and you're stuck in this tornado.
I can relate to that. I once told someone who I worked with, when they found out their wife had cancer, we were trying to, rally around that person like so many people had done for me at St. Thomas More when I found out about Eli. And I just put a note in the box in the teacher's lounge telling them that I know what it feels like when your world stops and everybody else's just keeps going or keeps moving right along. And it's so hard to be sitting in that, looking out at everybody else's life. And just 5 minutes ago, your life was like that, and you thought it was going to continue to be like that. And now you're in this place that you never imagined. And it's really hard to embrace that. But I think that being angry and being frustrated and asking the questions that you asked, I think anybody who's human that would have experienced that would have to ask those questions. And I think that's why Jesus goes to that point in his humanity as well, so that when we go there in ours, he can meet us there face to face, and we can experience everything that he did so we can become more like him. Absolutely. And I know as I read the book, you guys story related for so many reasons, but you could see as you were progressing through the book, once you got to the point where you had realized that this was now impacting somebody else the same way it impacted you, it was like there was a turning point. Mm-hmm. I saw in you in the book, in your perception of this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So one of my friends, Misty, whom I love so much, we had been friends for a long time, but I had never known someone that I was close to that had lost a child. So my truth was that, no one could possibly ever understand what I was going through, and that I was going through this alone. And when Misty lost Isley, she was killed in a head-on collision. A drunk driver hit him. And my assumption was that I was going to walk with her through her suffering, and that she was going to experience the same thing that I did: the anger, the frustration, the being mad at the drunk driver, which, our case wasn't a drunk driver, but just the anger towards people, or the situation that caused Isley to die. And in fact, what I found was this woman who was grieving with her faith, and she imitated the Blessed Mother to me. Where I ran from the cross, Misty stood. And that word, I don't think I've ever saw that word for what it was, because we just read, and you just read scripture like kind of quick, or hear in church. And when I thought about her, that word just stood out to me so much, that she stood at the foot of the cross. The Blessed Mother teaches us how to be with Jesus.
And she does that in such a profound way. And I know, as a man, for me, as a parent, I immediately was drawn to the Blessed Mother in my suffering. But I've also discovered now that I kind of missed out on asking St. Joseph for some of his intercession. And I know we've talked about a book that you guys just finished doing, a consecration. I finished a consecration. We ironically, maybe Holy Spirit moment, did it on the same day. We both finished a 33-day consecration to St. Joseph that's written by Father Donald Calloway on May the 1st. So Ryan, was that when you were dealing with your stuff, your emotions, your feelings going through that same time period, was Mary, did you find yourself kind of focusing on the idea that the Blessed Mother knows what that is and knows what that's like?
Yeah, I would say I did. I turned, to her and St. Joseph both, because, like us, those two went through the same things that we have suffered. So to turn and look at them and to have faith that, on the other side, there is light. Mm-hmm. So yes, I did turn to them.
Yeah. We actually were just talking about that before, because you had asked, like, who is our
saints?
Our saints. My Cursillo saint was St. Mary Magdalene, and I love her because she's radical, and I love to say that, kind of wild, in my love for Jesus. But when Ron and I were talking about it, and he said St. Joseph, and I said, well, no, St. John was your table. And he said, yeah, but I love St. Joseph.
I love St. Joseph. I mean,
I don't think anybody, after reading that book by Father Calloway, when you kind of look into the depth of the things that have been written about St. Joseph, just as a man, a husband, I know as a man and a husband, a father myself, he's pretty much standing head and shoulders above. And I have a lot of, I love St. Augustine, St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas More, some male saints. One of them's a lay person, who was married like us, that really had an impact on my life. But I didn't realize the power of the intercession of St. Joseph. And he was probably there by my side the whole time. I just didn't realize it, because he had to watch his wife suffer in other ways in Jesus's younger life. And it was only fitting that he would not be there, right? So that when he introduced everyone to God the Father, there'd be no confusion about his stepfather Joseph and the actual fatherhood of God, who had brought him, incarnate into the world to save humanity. So, I'm thinking about the suffering you guys went through. And I know you guys do grief ministry. Mm-hmm. And as somebody who's been through something who's pretty traumatic, and you guys have certainly been through a lot of traumatic things with both your children who passed away, and of course with Ryan's accident, people suffer from PTSD, from a traumatic experience. And then after they lose something as precious as a child, there's going to be stages of grief. I know there's different stages of grief. And what I wanted you guys to do was maybe talk about how did you see yourself moving through those stages of grief as a male and a female, and as a husband and a wife?
As a man, I think it was more delayed grief, because all in my mind I was worried about was Kelly, and Emma. After Talon died, and then we moved on, and then everything kind of turned back, not to normal, but Emma got better, and as we went on, moving to her surgery, and then Emma passing on, uh, I really turned to just worrying about Kelly. So I didn't worry about my grief at all, and not till much later did Kelly and I talk about it, and went through some rough times, but it wasn't too much later that we spoke about our grief, when we were writing our talk.
Yeah.
Um,
3 years ago.
3 years
really.
ago that we gave in Tennessee, and that's when it really hit me that I was grieving, but I don't think I ever showed it. Looking back, I prayed a lot. The only thing I didn't do was include Kelly in the prayer.
I was going to ask you about that because I remember reading about that in the book, and I was going to ask you if you thought that maybe dealing with some of your anger, some of your depression, some of your denial, I know those are stages of grief, did that impact your marriage at all when you held it all in and didn't share it with her?
Yes, it did. We as men, our society wants us to be this rock, be a stone, and don't be, you cry or you show your feelings. People say that you're feminine. Jesus wasn't feminine. Saint Joseph was not feminine. They were warriors. They were battling every day, and that's the only way I knew was to be a rock. I had no other, I guess, no role model to show me.
Sure.
But as through prayer and just through,
it was basically the grace of God. Like, we don't know how we really survived it, like looking back, because there was so much turmoil. I know, like for me, I felt emotionally abandoned by not only, my spouse. I also felt like abandoned, by the church, because there wasn't anything to support our grief. And that's one of the reasons why when we were at a place where we found healing, that we even said yes to do this ministry, because it's hard work. But I just, from what we went through, it's like I couldn't let another family be alone in that suffering, because it took us like 15 years to figure out kind of what happened to us, and to connect, like to put words to what we were going through. The fog was so thick, we couldn't even see what was right in front of us. We didn't understand our feelings, our emotions, like simple things like to cook. Like, it was like we were going to college, like just this big old process to just do simple things, and we didn't have any help. And there was one thing that I was confident about, was that we could be that for one other person. And then it started, well, we could be that for another person. It's kind of started out helping just the people that were in front of us. And then, friends saying, you should maybe consider that. And, like I remember telling my friend Courtney, oh, I don't want to do that. Like, cry in public, I'm never doing that.
Well, yeah. And it's waves. It hits you till this day. And I know you go through that too, Chad. Some days are better than others. And then you see other people, friends, family, strangers lose their loved ones. And you just see their world falling apart. And, you look back and say, man, we got, we think back, and we look forward and say, we have to help these people, definitely.
Because we know the consequences of not
calling the big elephant out in the room, basically.
Yes.
There was fights, and the fights wasn't about I don't know, breaking a glass or not doing clothes. It was something deeper, that way deeper, that we needed to work on.
Yeah. And I think we just pushed down our grief for so long that it just boils over. Like, no one's willing to talk about it, and it just explodes some days,
Yeah.
No, and it's a great segue into the next point I wanted to make is that one of the things I loved in your book, well, two things really, was that you talk about the impact that the Cursillo movement had on you in your conversion and your turning point. And then you talked about this Greek word metanoia, which is a conversion, a change of heart. And another line I took from your book that I loved is suffering is the lens through which we have the ability to see 2020. And it means that you have to look deep within yourself, right? Suffering kind of makes you turn around and look at yourself, and you start to see things about yourself that you've never seen before. And sometimes it helps you have to deal with your own insecurities and your own inadequacies. And then you have to be like totally dependent on God. Whereas before you were more self-dependent. I always tell people that I was, I honored God before I endured my cross. But once I've endured my cross and come through on the other side, and that's where we're heading to a resurrection, you start to be desperate for God because you realize that you are so limited and he is so limitless. And then if you just tap into his love, that he can do amazing things. He can heal you. He can heal the people around you. He can transform you and transform the world around you. So for me, I know that whenever I went through what I went through with Eli, and then I came out the other side of it, I used to compartmentalize my religion. It's like something I did on the weekend, but then when I got out of the church, it kind of got left there, and then it wasn't part of my everyday life. And all of a sudden, after Eli, that completely changed. And what I got from reading the book and that transition point from all the tragedy to where you start to give, you start to like look outward instead of always being focused on what's inward. You start to abandon that. And now all of a sudden, there's no compartmentalizing your faith. Your faith becomes everything. It becomes every aspect, every part of your life at all times. So could you guys maybe talk about very, briefly, how did that happen for you, Kelly, as a mom and a wife and a woman, and then Ryan, for you as a husband, a man, and as a father?
So for me, one of the things that, the first quote of the book was on the thorn in the flesh, and how, like what I proclaim in this book was not of my own wisdom, but it was because of the power of Christ and the words that he gave to me in adoration. I think for me, personally, that my faith was always one foot in the door, one foot out. So whenever that cross came, it was just easy to run away because, God to me at that time was almost like, Santa Claus. Like if you're good, you get good things. And if you're bad, you get bad things. And so that feeling that I'm not loved and that I'm not good, it was my truth. I love God for what he gave me, but not for who he was. And when I made my Cursillo, I mean, as many of probably the listeners, who have known, is that I met the real person of Jesus Christ there. And that suffering that had came, I don't think for me, there was anything before, even with, my mom was sick growing up. That's part of something I share in the book. But Ryan's accident, nothing had dropped me to my knees until I lost Talon and Emma and our miscarried baby, Christian Ryan. Nothing had dropped me to my knees. My pride, my independence. We live in this, like I talk about, like, we are born naked and dependent, but we raise our children to be independent. So like at the heart, I think, of every daughter and son of Christ is this, this expectation of dependency, but in reality, it's physical dependency and not spiritual dependency, spiritual independence. I might have said it wrong, but you know what I'm talking about. But that was the moment that I realized, I saw it for what it was, is that I couldn't do it alone. I needed God in a big way. And I was the hamster on the wheel all the times before that, just getting nowhere. And until we allowed God into our own lives and into our marriage, nothing made sense before that moment.
Yeah. Well, with me, after my accident, it's so funny because we had a call with some guys last week, and we were talking about it. And I said, I think my conversion really, like, I always was very devoted and prayed, but it was just reciting it, not meaning it. And when I broke my back, I think I had a conversion without, not a full conversion, but man, it's like prayers kind of meant more to me. And I actually didn't just repeat them and recite them. I meant it. And then as looking forward to with everything else that happened to us, we, after all the grief and everything, we filled our heart. Tried filling this hole. Everybody's born with a hole in their heart for God. He puts it there because He's the only one that can bring true joy into your life.
Right.
And we tried filling it with toys and with, all happy things.
And,
because you can be happy but still not be joyful.
Absolutely.
And till we put Him as the center of our house and the king of our everything, our hearts actually were filled with joy. And we're so joyful. Yeah, we still suffer, we still grieve, but we're so much more joyful with Him in our life and at the center of our relationship. So
well, I see you guys as a Simon of Cyrene for those people who are walking in the path that you've already gone through, that are coming upon that immense grief from that loss. And you are also a sign of hope that you can come out on the other side resurrected, and that you can find joy in your life from God, and that your children are a gift. You wrote about that in the book, and you never looked at them as a gift until you realized you had to give them back. And we always say, children are a gift, but when we have a child, we tend to think they're our child, but they're actually God's child. They're only on loan to us. And they were there to teach us something more profound than we probably will ever teach them. If God's not the king of your heart, like you just talked about, Ryan, I think you say a prayer instead of praying a prayer. Yes. When God is the king of your heart, you begin to pray a prayer because it's a prayer of union with Him. And it's a prayer of surrender. And it's realizing that your true fulfillment comes from becoming the person He created you to be, because you've been running around so restlessly trying to become the person everybody else said you should be. And of course, as a man, I don't know about you, for me, that can be a sign of vulnerability. But I like to point out the fact that, Christ is the ultimate man's man. And at the moment when He seemed to be at His weakest, when He was on the cross, in that moment of vulnerability is when He was the strongest, which is the quote that you picked to start your book and the one I started the podcast with. It's in our weakness where He is made visible and strong to other people. And that's when we become instruments of God that bring other people to Himself. And you guys are doing that right now. And I'm just there's one more quote I'll share. And I just think about what you just said, and it sums it up. During my suffering, God gave me 3 gifts. You're right, Kelly. He strengthened me. He clarified my belief. He helped me understand the gospel with compassion. And this all equipped me to continue in my own healing. And now I'm sure it equips you to help people heal in their suffering as you walk with them in this ministry for both of you. And I think, when we talked a couple of weeks ago in preparation, we talked about how sometimes everybody always asks, probably, Ryan, you can affirm this, how Kelly was doing, but very few people asked you how you were doing. I just want to hit on this for any men that are listening. Men going through things, it's really important that another man ask you, hey, man, how are you doing? And it's okay to show a sign of weakness to that man and let him know you need a little help. Yeah,
because, when you're going through it, everybody in there that you speak to, they always ask about the wife. I mean, it's just society. How's the woman? How's the woman? Right. And, not very many people asked how I was. And not till much later, I even thought about that somebody didn't ask me how I was feeling, or, so I kind of go out of my way now. I do go out of my way now when people lose, especially people I know, but I mean, even strangers that you meet and you may just be acquaintances, asking them, like, hey, I'm saying I'm here to help you. I'm not just saying that. I really mean it, So
I can just say, as a man who, that's huge. Even if the men won't say it up front, it's going to be really huge for them, because they need somebody to be able to look them in the eye that they can relate to, who's dealt with something difficult, and that they can be vulnerable with, and that they can share that with. That's going to walk with them. Proverbs 27:17 says, one iron sharpens iron, one man sharpens another. And as a man and as a woman, you have to have people around you, both male and female, who are going to support you in that and give you a chance to voice those things. And then the last thing for me, I know, Kelly, you write about how you were not raised fully Catholic, but then you came in the full communion with the Catholic Church. And you talk about Mary, and I have a great relationship with the Blessed Mother. I think she's one of the most misunderstood things about Catholicism for people on the outside looking in. And she's just a treasure. Yeah. And I'm going to quote something from the book again. From Mary, we learn to surrender to God's will in all things. So true. From Mary, we learn to trust even when all hope seems gone. From Mary, we learn to love Christ, her son, the Son of God. Mm-hmm. And, she kind of opens us to oceans of Jesus that we would have never been available to without her. What is the role of the Blessed Mother in your life now? What's her role in Ryan's life, and what is her role in your marriage?
Yeah. So I'll tell you a little, the story, how I came to really, really know Mary. For me, because, I wasn't raised Catholic, even though I was baptized Catholic, I wasn't raised Catholic. And so the prayer of the rosary had always been something we prayed at funerals. So it was always this sad, prayer. And I couldn't wrap my head around it. But so it started, like, my relationship with Mary really started after Cursillo. When I came across the first person who I was going to help through their grief after Misty. So the first person after Misty, her name was Molly, and she had lost her baby on Mary's birthday. And when I went to the bookstore because I love to give people gifts. So, like, if I show up to go and love on you, I'm going to bring you something that's special. And that's just how I show my love. And so I go to the bookstore and I buy her a card. It's the Nativity of the Blessed Mother, and I buy her a plaque. And I go to give her the gift, and she starts to unwrap it, and she pushed her chair back, and she said, "Kelly, I'm not Catholic." She said, "But there's no way that you would have known that this image of baby Jesus had the same color hair as Everett." So Everett, his hair was kind of reddish brown, and Jesus's hair is normally just regular brown. And so I think, like, that really touched her heart. That was the first thing. And so I come home because I didn't know how she was going to respond. Like if she was going to continue to let me to support her. And I was in my foyer and I was sweeping some leaves, and I remember I stopped and I kind of just threw my hands up in the air, and I was like, God, like, why would you give me the courage to say yes? And the first person you send me is not Catholic, because it just made my Cursillo. So it was like, I could only focus on one thing at a time, So, like, Lord, I have to only be able to serve, people of the same faith as me, because I didn't want to confuse myself. And I was kind of, like, frustrated. Like, why would you send me someone who I couldn't even, like, tell about Mary? And I was like, if you are going to ask me to serve, you have to let me know the words. And he told me, he said, "What is your greatest fear in losing your children?" And I answered him that they would be forgotten, that they would have died in vain, that their death would serve no purpose. And he told me, he said, "What do you think Mary does for the church?" And I just started crying, because for the first time, I truly understood her role as being our mother church. Like, I understood she always points us to Jesus, so that people don't forget that he died on the cross for our salvation. I didn't see it before then. Never looked at Mary as a grieving mother. Like, I just looked at her as, like, the mother of God, and that was so profound to me, because I knew that was nothing I read. Like, I knew that was God that spoke to me, to my heart, because it was my fear. It was my fear. And so I could relate to her, because I understood that's probably what she felt, even though she was perfect and she was without sin. I mean, as a mother, how do you not feel that way? And my son gave his life for the world so that we would have eternal life, that we would, be together forever. And people forget. That struck me.
No, that's just a beautiful answer. There's nothing really to be added to that. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Ryan, what about you?
For me, growing up, my grandmother had a deep devotion to Mary. I mean, she said rosaries.
She'd break them.
Yeah, she'd probably say 10 to 12 rosaries a day, and always talked about, she always suffered a lot. So she always talked about Mary, you know, and how, like Kelly explained, um, that she suffered that grief. She stayed there and suffered, while he was there dying on the cross for us. So yes, I'd say through my grandmother it kind of started, and just from when you have a relationship with someone, it's more meaningful. And I guess just just praying to her, like I told you, not reciting the prayer, but actually believing it and meaning it, and
Like asking for
for help, like intercede with this. I think through that, definitely it's continued. So
I don't know a loving mother that would leave a child that's wayward and it's crying out for help. I don't know a single mother that wouldn't run to help her child. And Mary certainly does that for us in such a great spiritual way, as Catholics. And I think it's beautiful that you guys say that. I'm thinking of Venerable Fulton Sheen said that Mary's like the moon.
Yes.
All of her light is a reflection of her sun, pun intended, and it points back to him. It always does. And that's certainly been my experience in my Catholic faith. And I think, I can see you guys, even though this is a podcast, we have a video, and I can just see the joy in your face as you're speaking about this. So obviously you've had a resurrection. And although this is a tragic thing, it's also been a very positive thing. So I know this is really going to be kind of hard to do, but maybe in one or two sentences or a couple of statements, could you say how this tragic thing turned out to be one of the best things in your life? And maybe it's because now your children didn't die in vain. Every couple you help, their life matters too.
Yeah.
Well, as a kid, you always think about gifts, about getting gifts. And as you grow as an adult, you realize that through giving is when you really receive. And I think, it took me a long time to get there, and losing our kids. I don't like to say this, but it's almost as that's what Jesus needed for me to go through to truly understand what he was about,
Yeah. For me, I never saw anyone else's pain. I only could see mine before Crisio. Like, I really honestly believed that I was in a rowboat all by myself. I truly did. And when I got there and you see all these people suffering, and you're like, our lives are not, the majority of the world's lives is not perfect. People suffer in all kind of ways, all different shapes and forms. And for the first time in my life, I saw others I saw their souls, and I could see the suffering that is hidden. And I think that that is the gift of my resurrection, is that God has given me the ability to see others' pain. And I know, like, our little saints in heaven are, they're interceding. Like Ron and I always talk about, like, I could just envision like Mary and Joseph and Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit. They're moving heaven and earth like a chess game. Like, you need to meet my mommy and you need to meet my daddy, so that we can cross paths of people who are suffering, because like we meet people in these random places, some that we will hear about their story, and then we see them. And it's like, there's no other explanation but that.
And I want to add one thing, it's at your lowest is when, he breaks you down to your lowest, when you have nothing. And I think that's another way that he did with me. I think he knew that that's the only way I would actually, surrender.
Yeah.
Truly surrender.
We're prideful human beings.
Yeah, very prideful. And just thinking back, after Kelly said that, just made me think of that. So,
well, I can relate to that because I always say in my testimony about my son, when I share it publicly, there's a line in it where I say, God brought me to nothing
Mm-hmm.
So in the midst of my nothingness, I could find him.
Yep.
That's right.
And that's where you find God, is when you realize he's God
Mm-hmm.
and you're not. I mean,
Exactly.
you say that your whole life, but when you're in those situations, you really know in the depth of your soul,
Yep.
he's God.
Definitely.
And I'm not. And, you know, those coming from a man, or anyone really, but from a man especially, to say that in this day and age is immensely powerful, and it empowers other men to realize that it's okay to surrender. It's
Mm-hmm.
okay not to be in control.
Yes.
It's okay to give it to God and let him carry you when you can't carry it. You know, I told somebody one time, you just say yes, and then you pick up the cross and he carries it because you can't.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what he does in our life.
There really is freedom in that surrender.
Oh, there's a huge
Total
freedom in that. Yes, a freedom that you can't find, I don't believe, anywhere else. And I don't believe you can find a conviction for your faith like that anywhere else. Well, I want to thank you guys. It's been great having you today. I want to thank you for your humility. It was very transparent in the talks that you gave and the answers you gave, and your vulnerability in sharing your personal struggle
Mm-hmm.
and how you've allowed Christ to work in that for your own benefit, but most importantly now through your ministry for the benefit of others. If you're in need of ministry, if you lost a loved one, I want you to reach out to Kelly and Ryan and to their ministry. And I want you to go to her website. It's redbird.love. You can find about information there about their ministry, but you can also get a copy of her amazing book there, Hiding in the Upper Room. I'm going to ask if you enjoyed the program and want to share this incredible journey with others, please share the podcast, give it a rating, leave a comment. If you have a story or you want to recommend someone who does, or if you'd like to invite me to speak at an event, you can make that request on one of my social media outlets listed, as well as pick up a copy of my 3 books at chadjudice.com. All proceeds from my writing and speaking go to fund Eli's lifelong medical expenses. Remember, we must boast most gladly in our weaknesses, so the strength of Christ might be with us. For when we are weak, that's when we're strong. It truly takes a Good Friday in our life in order to leave behind who the world says we should be, in order to rise with Christ on Easter Sunday and become the person he created us to be, a saint. God love you.
In a world that says give up, I did not yield. I gave my all for your battlefield.